For decades, the United States has been entering conflicts believing overwhelming military and economic power would determine the outcome. But what if that assumption no longer holds? If it does, this war ends on America's terms. If it doesn't, the consequences could extend far beyond the Middle East. Today, Pascal Lottaz explains why he believes we're witnessing a fundamental shift in global power.
Welcome to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. How you all doing today?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to VRIC Media, your most trusted voice in metals and mining. I'm your host, Daryl Thomas, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing Pascal Lottaz of Neutrality Studies. How you doing today, Pascal?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Daryl.
Yeah, so we were talking offline. You had pretty much explained to me what Zionism was, and I believe our last interview that we did was the first time I've really sought to understand what it was. And I started doing some research, and what I've uncovered is something that I can't unsee, Pascal.
Yeah, it's very sad. Again, going through international life with eyes closed and just believing that, it's just a feud between two peoples who kind of historically have been kind of dueling is much easier to stomach than the what's actually going on, a 250-year-old kind of development in which we are now at the point where a settler colonial state is trying to eradicate the natives. But yeah, what can we do?
What is Israel's part? What are they playing in this conflict? I haven't heard much about them. I heard some feud between Trump and Netanyahu, or Trump said some words, and then they kind of just disappeared from the scene, at least from the headlines, from what I've been seeing.
Well, I mean, last time we talked was was more than half a year ago, right? And that was before the Iran war. What happened in the meantime is, of course, that Netanyahu successfully convinced Donald Trump to attack Iran, which is kind of is a really big thing, not only for Netanyahu, but for many Israelis, especially the expansionist-minded ones that always wanted to take out Iran for many decades. It's kind of the biggest opposition or obstacle to Israeli dominance in the entire West Asian region. Iran has been the main resisting power that also, I mean, we're in mass media, we always hear that they are the sponsors of local terrorism, Hamas and Hezbollah and whatnot. Matter of the fact is that they view themselves as the resistance to Israeli aggression, and that's something the Israelis wanted to take out, and they've tried several times to convince several U.S. administrations to do this. They were not successful with it. Now with Donald Trump it worked, and what it basically led to is that the U.S. is now has been bombing and droning and missiling Iran for first 1.5 weeks, then extended blockade on Iran. Both of them failed. Then we got a memorandum of understanding in which the U.S. pretended that it wanted to actually come to a settlement and an agreement. By now, we know, because the U.S. administration said as much, that this was mainly done in order to buy some time to ship more weaponry into West Asia. And now we're in the second phase of the war, where the bombing has restarted. Although, as we speak today on my July 28th, your July 27th, the actual bombing campaign has again halted. But we are still within a very hot phase of the war, in which the United States is somehow trying to break Iran and exert their dominance over the Strait of Hormuz, which is the United States' now main pain point, a pain point which didn't exist before February, because the strait was open, no problem, no tolls, nothing. And now the Iranians are using the strait as a way to directly hurt the United States where it actually hurts, which is in petroleum. It seems that the US, or at least the US administration, believed that it was immune from any kind of, large scale hurt from an oil shock, because it seems that the administration believed the US is self-sufficient, because fracking, no problem, right? We got all the oil we want. Well, turns out there's actually two types of crude, heavy and light. The US is self-sufficient with light crude, but you cannot use that to make to make diesel or jet fuel. The US is a net importer of heavy crude, and even controlling Venezuelan oil, which is heavy crude, doesn't actually make the United States self-sufficient yet. So the impact from the blockade that Iran was able to do on the Strait of Hormuz directly started impacting the U.S. strategic petroleum reserves, and that's something I think that a development that at least the administration that okayed this plan to go to war with Iran together with Israel did not foresee in this magnitude. And now we're at the point where Israel is basically just leaning back and officially says we are not intervening because, it's not really their war, it's a US war, and they just let the United States do the dirty work, from which it is really hard for the US to extract itself. Not that they are really trying to do so. And the Iranians, interestingly, they have the assessment that the current Israeli government is in very dire straits. Netanyahu is very unpopular, and he might actually lose the upcoming elections this year. So the Israelis are actually the Iranians are not bombing the Israelis at the moment because they do not want to upset the unpopularity of the current government, which I found very interesting. I had a discussion about this with Professor Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran, and I asked him, it's weird, why are you only bombing the Gulf states but not Israel? And he said, well, right now we think our main enemy is having a big trouble, so we don't want to give them a reason to rally around the flag, so we're not attacking them directly. We're trying to bomb the United States extended network of allies to make it impossible for the US to continue its bombing campaign on Iran. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a bit where we are at the moment.
Quite a few things to unpack there, and I'm recalling in our last interview you gave the warning. You said, I think that the U.S. is going to launch an attack on Iran. Mm. And I believe it was like the week of the event. It was like right before it happened. And so I'm glad you mentioned that we had that conversation before the war had kicked off. So the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, I just want to touch on oil for a second. I saw this chart earlier, and it shows that the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is at its lowest levels since the early 80s. And so how critical is that? Is this a major factor? I mean, Donald Trump says that, we have a lot of oil. Many people in the U.S. believe we have a lot of oil to refill this at some point. And so just curious in your thoughts, but it kind of seems like if we have enough oil, we shouldn't be drawing these down, correct?
Again, we have enough light oil, light crude, and I'm not an expert on this, but if I'm informed correctly, then you can use light crude in order to manufacture stuff like plastic. So the United States won't run out of plastic bags in your shopping centers and whatnot, but you cannot use light crude in order to produce two critical things. One is diesel, and the other one is jet fuel. And a couple of other derivative products. It's just not, light crude is apparently just not energy dense enough for those. And the thing is, you and I, we would think, oh, why does diesel still matter? I mean, all of our cars out there are not running on diesel, and they're maybe electric anyhow, so why would I care? Point is, a lot of the heavy machinery, including the engines of tankers out in the high sea, including heavy duty machinery, including a lot of trucks and so on, they all run on diesel. And without that stuff, you then don't get things moved, especially across also a continent like the United States. Also because the other thing is jet fuel, right? If the price of the diesel rises that is needed in order to move stuff of, what is it? One of North America's largest retailers, like just a food retailer or whatnot, Walmart. Let's say Walmart. All of the things in Walmart, they need to be transported from A to B, right? Now, if the cost of transporting those rises, then you automatically have to create a markup on all of those things, right? In order to cover for that. And that's then just a real economy inflation. It's not the kind of money printing inflation. It is inflation due to higher costs of primary materials, and that is very dangerous to the United States administration, because it will increase the cost of living potentially dramatically. So right now, the release of these strategic petroleum reserves, that's why you've got them, is to have a buffer, right? To be able to go through 1, 2, 3 months of oil crunch without them having a large impact on prices. The impact on price that we saw until now, that's very important to understand, of Brent and so on going up, is not due to shortage. It's due to speculation. It's due to what the expectations are about the future. Because the oil market actually is one that has a long delay, because a lot of these tankers that transport this oil can take 2 or 3 months to reach their destinations, right? So in the system, the global system, you constantly have a flow of oil that is quite delayed. So if today the strait stops, then everything beyond the strait is still going to supply the ports that they're destined for, and the global 100 million barrels of oil daily that are needed, they still flow until it then goes down, and then the big haggling will start, of different countries and different importers trying to bid and offer more money for the crude that's still available and importing it from further away. But what it will do is it will push the entire market price of this thing up for real, not for speculative purposes, but because there's a supply shortage. And that's what the US and other countries too are trying to smooth over at the moment. The US released its strategic petroleum reserve. The Japanese did so, others did so, the Chinese did so. The Chinese are the most underrated ones, because they managed to basically cut their imports by over 30%, which is quite dramatic, which is then oil that is available on the world markets for other markets, and that also helped stabilize the real oil prices for quite a while. But the longer this thing lasts, and the more the United States needs to dip into these strategic petroleum reserves and maybe even draw them down to a place near zero, although I think you cannot, for practical purposes, you cannot go to complete zero because of the way these facilities are constructed. But that would just mean that you would actually land in a physical oil shortage. Not oil, again, a physical diesel, jet fuel, and other derivative shortage, which would be, in my view, probably one of the first times since in 100 or 200 years even, that the United States has serious problems with its oil supply. There might have been other moments when that I can't recall, but it would be, this would be a real economic shock that would drive up prices quite quickly, and for all the consumer goods, for everything across the board. So it would be quite a bit of inflation. And looking at how things are going now, it seems to me that also part of the MOU was to buy more time in order to refill a bit of that stock, in order to kind of smooth over the midterm elections. But seems to me that the way the timing is working out, if they don't have some sort of resolution for Hormuz soon, that it's going to hit right around September, October. Because again, as you showed on that chart, the line is going down. So there's just little you can do. A reserve is only so and so big. So you need some form of resolution. And the US administration right now is trying to bomb its way into a resolution. But the Iranians are saying, like, nah, we are just not giving up, period. And you can't do it. You can't take us out. This whole idea, even if you put boots on the ground, it's amazing, boots on the ground, we will occupy the Strait of Hormuz. It's like, are you under the impression that these people sit on the stone walls next to the strait and shoot down with muskets? That's not how it works. They have medium-range ballistic missiles. They shoot them from inside the country, not from the coast. This is not on site. Anyhow, so it's a pretty desperate thing, and I do hope that somebody in the U.S. in Washington will tell the administration, do not put boots on the ground. You will make everything much worse. But at the moment, it looks as if though the movements of refuel planes and whatnot seem to indicate that the US is at least preparing for the option of sending troops in, which in my view is going to be a suicide mission. But we'll see. It's desperate times, it seems.
Yeah, I've been just trying to wrap my head around for a while just what is the end game here. I mean, at one point it was so that Iran couldn't have enriched uranium, but then after researching the joint comprehensive act that was signed under Obama, that Trump got us out of, like enriched uranium went down significantly, and then when Trump took us out of that deal, it started to rise again. And then Trump had said that he wanted to avoid economic disaster on the first time we had the ceasefire and the MOU, and now we're back trying to bomb them into submission and things of that nature, and that seems to be like it's going to create economic disaster, like you mentioned with the oil and such. And so you seem like a very logical person. I mean, you get the PhD, all of that, right? What do you think is the end game?
No, I asked this a lot of people on my own channel, Larry Johnson and others, Colonel Douglas McGregor, and they all say there is no strategy. There is no, as they call it, theory of victory. Maybe in the beginning, in February, the main goal, I believe, when they started this, was regime change. It's like the idea is that Netanyahu sold to Trump is, Iran is a house of cards. They had large protests, right? The regime just had to kill 30,000 of its own citizens, which is a absolutely bogus number. I mean, nothing like that actually took place. There was violence in the streets. The violence was fomented, and there were people on the side of the police forces dying. There were people on the side of the protesters dying, but this was very much an instigated kind of thing. And the death number, that the death toll that we get, especially from Iran, which actually published the list of people who died, is around 3,000 in these January days. But anyhow, the Netanyahu and the neocons in Washington sold this to the Trump administration most likely as proof that the Iran is ripe to collapse. So now we need to push it over the brink and liberate the Iranian people, right? So we just bomb them, we decapitate the leadership, we kill Ali Khamenei, and then the people will naturally rise up and will take over the government, and glorious liberation, right? And Iran basically flips. It flips from red to blue, right? That's the way these people think, like a really stupid board game kind of terminology. And Iran will become our bulwark, which we can then use against China and Russia. So that must have been, in my view, that was probably the initial idea, because even Donald Trump in his speeches the first couple of days, he actually literally kept talking to the camera and saying, it is now up to you, brave people of Iran, to take back your government. We are supporting you from the air. And by support from the air, he of course meant carpet bombing them from the air. And lo and behold, what nobody foresaw, and Donald Trump said, we never thought this would happen. And it's like, really? Okay, fine. Lo and behold, if you start dropping bombs on the heads of people, they do not identify their own government that tries to shoot down those weapons with the enemy. They identify the one who drops the bombs as the enemy. Who would have thought? I mean, who would have ever have thought that you would identify the one who sends the bombs as the enemy? Fine. So what this now led to is a rallying around the flag. The thing that the Iranians don't want to cause inside Israel. That's what happened in Iran, of people, actually even people I know who don't like the Iranian government, who suddenly told me, look, they told us for 30 years that the Americans are going to attack us. We always thought they only say that to cling to power. And now it turns out they were right. The Americans are attacking us. So, and when we are attacked, even if I don't like my government, I mean, my country is being attacked. So we are now going to support the resistance against this. And you've had massive numbers of people who started engaging in the defense of their country, all the way to Iranians living outside of Iran, like in the diaspora, actually flocking back to Iran in order to help and support their country. And we've seen recently with this large funeral, the largest funeral in human history, apparently, 40 million people in the streets and over 7, 8, 9 days participating in the funeral to Ali Khamenei, basically almost half the entire country of Iran participating in one form or another in this funeral. Just how massive the support is, not maybe for the government, but the support for resisting an act of aggression and an attack. And the first wave of the attack, the first 6 weeks, were actually very intense. And Tehran was burning. They were bombing Tehran. And I interviewed Professor Marandi, and he was saying suddenly, "Oh yeah, they're bombing again." In a neighborhood somewhere out there, and thousands of people died. Right. What happened is that the regime change kind of idea collapsed. That wouldn't work. It didn't work, and it didn't happen. So, and I think that was Plan A. Plan B, which I have no proof that they actually have this plan, but from the things that they were talking about and from the kind of approaches that they had, also with the neighboring countries, Trump for a couple of weeks was talking about incentivizing, the Kurds in Iraq to march into Iran and then hopefully instigate the Kurds in Iran to rise up and basically have a little civil war inside Iran. So I think Plan B was to somehow instigate enough regional tension in order for Iran basically to break up, right? And secessionism and the North maybe starting to have a war against the center and whatnot. So good old chaos. Throw them into complete chaos. But that strategy too failed, since the different ethnicities in Iran are actually, turns out, quite well integrated into Iranian society, and the Azeris and the Kurds and so on living in Iran do feel more Iranian than being a minority within the state. Iran is a successful multi-ethnic state that actually integrates all of these minorities into its national project. And there was until now was and is no insurrection inside the country. So Plan B also didn't work. And then Plan C probably was to just take control of the strait and control the sea lanes, and then starve Iran even more. The idea of a blockade that they implemented in the second phase and are implementing again now, or trying to implement, is to basically do sanctions on steroids, right? Normal sanctions work by denying countries access to the banking system, access to trade in goods and services, and then if you put up a blockade, then you try to make that even harsher by making it physically impossible for the little trade that there is to take place. And thereby, strangle the Iranian economy, again with the hope that in the end the pain will on the general population will be so high that you will have some form of internal strife, and that strife either leads to regime change or leads to national collapse and chaos and civil war, both of which would be good for the US and of course Israel. But also this one is not working, so it seems to me now we're in the phase back to bombing. The idea, let's try one more time and see if this time we can get rid of enough of their military capability in order to take over the sea lanes of communication and then further strangle them. And beyond that, I mean, the thing I see is that the United States is actually in a trial and error mode. Trial and error, and they've tried at least 3 different things. I don't know if they again a fourth thing they might try is a physical takeover of some of the land of Iran, some of the islands, strategic outposts. maybe something close to the strait, and then occupy that and hope that will then lead to, the control of the strait, and then enable the US to further strangle Iran. To me, this is all strategies of a lot of hope and a lot of just guesswork. So I do not think at the moment that there is one clear-cut theory of victory of what it would look like, because the ones they had, they broke on reality. And I just doubt that there's a overarching kind of military plan of how to bring about the defeat of Iran by systematically doing X. I don't think they have that, which is something that the Russians have when it comes to Ukraine. They have a systematic strategy of how to implement the war on the battlefield in order to achieve something. And I do not think that an equivalent is true at the moment for the US in Iran.
Okay, so you mean to tell me that at first it was about regime change?
Yeah.
And it went from regime change to control of the strait, the same strait that was open prior to the attack, which is ludicrous. Like when you think about it, like the regime change isn't happening. I mean, we took out one of their leaders. That's new leaders are ready to be instituted, and they come up and they have the same ideology and such. And then now we're fighting for control of the strait that was already open before we launched the attack on Iran.
Yeah, because turns out the Iranians are not just sitting back and letting it happen. For some reason, the U.S. administration in February thought, like, what's the worst Iranians can do? They can bomb a little bit the Gulf states, but that will be it, right? No. Turns out they can choke off the Strait of Hormuz, and then apparently the idea was like, yeah, how bad can that be? I mean, again, we have enough oil, right? Not understanding that you don't have the type of right oil that you need inside the United States, and that Iran is now using this as a huge leverage that before it didn't use that. It never had to, which is why it probably struck as a surprise that they would and could do it. Again, the problem the neocons have is that they systematically overestimate the US abilities, military abilities. Like they constantly think you can just solve any problem with military power, and US military power is limitless. That's literally what some of them are saying. And on the other hand, they systematically underestimate their opponents and go like, oh yeah, Iran, that's just, it's just a big version of Hezbollah. You just throw enough bombs, they will just collapse. They're just a terrorist organization, right? Just terrorists. They're disorganized, kind of bearded savages that if you bomb them, they'll go away. Well, no, they don't. I mean, even the Taliban in Afghanistan were a much more formidably organized fighting force than the United States foresaw, and it took the United States 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban in Afghanistan because you just couldn't get rid of them. And that's the Taliban somewhere in hideouts in the mountainous area of Afghanistan, and the same people who are responsible for that are the ones who told the general public, no worries, no problem, we are now going to win a war with Iran. And then on the bombastic fanfare, right? For 47 years, these people are waging a war against us, and we, the first administration that now goes in and cleans it up, like this kind of nonsense. But that's neocon way of thinking. It's like, we have a military, why don't we use it? And the other ones are savages, they can't really put up a resistance anyhow, let's go and smash them. And if ever we get tired of it, we just walk out. The US got tired of Afghanistan, it walked out. It was kind of a debacle, it was in the news for 3 weeks, and then what happened? It was gone, it was out of the news, and nobody really remembers anymore. Nobody could put their finger, was it in 2020 or in 2023 when we went out? What even happened? I mean, you can memory hold that kind of stuff. You can even memory hold the Vietnam War if you just put enough time in between, right? So the thing is, the US has the ability, as a great power fighting distant wars, to walk away and be fine. That's something that Germany couldn't do with its war in the Second World War. That's something Japan couldn't do because, at the end, they came to the capital, right? There's just no possibility, not even in the remotest kind of dreams, that the Taliban will ever show up in DC, or that the IRGC will ever show up in DC. So the big benefit that the United States has is that it can, at any point in time, just try to implement the war, and if it gets tired, it just walks away and nothing really bad happens. I mean, you have a couple of dead US soldiers, but those are all, I mean, not the sons and daughters of anyone important, right? Therefore, who cares? That's like the thing. The capitalist class doesn't care about people, not about the Iranians and not about the Americans either. It's like, if those peasants, folks, and so on die, then, well, that's what they signed up for, and that's what they're there for. It's quite a despicable way of thinking about people in general. But those are unfortunately people with quite a bit of power and influence in DC.
Yeah, for sure. So the MOU, what was your initial thoughts on the MOU? Do you think some of this, I mean, right now it says that Trump is back in talks with Iran. I don't know if he's talking to himself in the mirror, like kind of like the meme, or if Iran's actually engaging with them. Does the MOU look different next time? I wasn't sure like what didn't work within the MOU and why we resorted back to bombing.
There's not going to be a next MOU in my estimate, mainly because I think the Iranians are done with that. The MOU was an attempt by the Iranians to give the United States a chance to say, like, okay, the MOU is not a peace agreement, right? Very important. The MOU is just a roadmap of how to get to a peace agreement. The MOU was made in order to codify kind of a couple of basic literal points of understanding. Okay, we agree that this is how we understand the situation, and we, upon these points, 14 it was, I believe, or 15, we will base the peace process. And within 60 days, we then want to try to hammer out a proper peace agreement that will settle things like reparations and the way forward with the control of the strait and so on and so forth, and security guarantees. And in the MOU, you know, the Iranians structured it in a way that if successful, the final outcome document would have to be ratified by the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council, which is a very smart thing to do. So one of the main problems of any kind of peace agreement, and the Iranians understood that apparently very well, is that if you make such a treaty, it becomes a bilateral treaty, and under the US constitutional framework, this treaty needs to be first signed by the president, as in by the executive, as an intention for this to become US law, but then it needs to go to Congress. And Congress needs to say yes to this, right? Because Congress is the representative of the people. And it's absolutely clear that the current Republican majority and even some of the neocons on the Democrat side would never, ever put their signature to such a treaty. Which is a problem. But the Iranians then cleverly said, like, well, United States, you already have a treaty with the UN, which is ratified, you recognize the UN and whatnot, and because you are even one of the top dogs, right, sitting in the five, being one of the big five who sits permanently in the Security Council, so we want an agreement with you that then goes to the Security Council. And if the Security Council then stamps it, and you, Mr. Trump, you have your ambassador there, and the ambassador answers to the White House, not to Congress. So you order him to vote yes on this. The Russians, the Chinese, the others will vote yes as well. And then this will be a Security Council resolution. And Security Council resolutions, at least in theory, are binding also on the United States. They are part of international law, and they're parcel of what the United States recognizes as valid. So I thought that's a very, very clever way of actually, squaring the circle. But that was only one part. The other part of the MOU was several provisions that laid out how in the 60 days you will get to this peace agreement, and they were laid out in a way that the Iranians could check if the United States lived up to its promises. One was, for instance, that Iran would have de facto control and would be administering the Strait of Hormuz. And the United States said okay to that. And it said okay to other things, including sanctions relief, including access to funds. And those are all things that the executive branch can do. that they can put in Trump can put an executive order, and then things will start changing. And that's then something that the Iranians can look at and say, like, are they doing it? So the MOU was structured in a way for Iran not just to have to believe in the goodwill of the United States. Let's just believe that they will live up to their word, but let's check if they do it. And lo and behold, they didn't. The US signed this agreement, Donald Trump put his signature to it, and then pretty little started changing. The only thing that actually changed it is that a couple of troops and equipment got withdrawn. But turns out the US was within 2-3 weeks, it was trying to sneakily establish a second corridor in the Strait of Hormuz. You can divide the strait into a northern part that's closer to Iran and a southern part that's closer to Oman, and they were trying to establish their own transit corridor that they control. And that's where Iran said, hey, that's not what we said. The MOU clearly says the entire strait is going to be administered with us, and anyone who wants to pass needs to register with us. And then the US said, like, no, that's not what we're going to do. And then they tried to put through their ships anyhow. And then the Iranians started shooting at those ships and said, like, no, that's not what we're going to do. And then the United States had a temper tantrum. Trump had a temper tantrum saying, like, oh, how dare you firing at innocent ships? You are in breach of the MOU, blah, blah, blah. No, the MOU clearly says it's Iran in charge. You are in breach of the MOU, and you're proving to the Iranians that you don't intend to live up to your word. And so my assessment now is, I was surprised, that Trump signed this MOU, because it read like a declaration of surrender, because it gave Iran basically everything it wanted for this 60-day period of time. So, looked like a surrender document. But now turns out, I understand that...
Wasn't there like $300 billion in there?
Oh, yeah, like 300 billion in reparations and so on. Yeah, that was in there. And of course, it never happened. So Trump signed the document because he understood from the very beginning, it doesn't matter. We're never going to do this. I can sign, this is toilet paper. He just signed a piece of toilet paper, knowing that it doesn't matter. And that was the whole strategy, because all we want is a bit of time. We want a couple of weeks in order to replenish. We want a couple of weeks to kind of give the oil reserves time to stabilize a little bit, right? Blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to do a second blow. So that was, again, the United States using a tool of diplomacy as a way to get some military benefit and then implement military solutions again, which they did many times before. Again, they started bombing Iran while pretending to be negotiating with them back in February, right? They did that several times, pretending to do diplomacy. And this was another instance, and the Iranians were very clever in calling that bluff, or in structuring the MOU in a way that they would notice very early whether the US lives up to it or not. And they did. That's exactly what the MOU was supposed to do, to show if they live up to it or not. And therefore, Iran could start again militarily implement its side of the bargain relatively quickly. And they didn't give the United States a lot of time for this recovery period. And that's why we are back at bombing and kinetic warfare, because I'm pretty sure the United States wanted a longer break, but the Iranians wouldn't give it, because, again, they structured the thing in a way that they would notice when things go south, and south they went pretty quickly.
Yeah. So what do you think are the probabilities that come out of this situation? Right now, the Iranians, they're like, we don't trust you, Donald Trump. Like you mentioned multiple times, where there's an agreement, then the agreement was violated or not held to with integrity, and they don't trust Donald Trump. They don't trust the U.S. government, and I'm just kind of like, okay, well, it seems like it's like a stalemate, or we're at some type of impasse, and this either leads to boots on the ground and further conflict, or the strait being closed indefinitely for a longer time. Just curious in your thoughts on what do you think happens out of this?
Well, the Iranians I talked to, they all keep going back to one of the most recent wars that Iran was fighting in their living memory, which is the war with Iraq. It's easily forgotten in the West that Iran was fighting for 8 years with Saddam Hussein who got weapons from the United States and all the and logistic support and so on at the time in the 1990s, and hundreds of thousands of people died in Iran. It was pretty bloody war, 8 years, and 8 years is a long time. But the Iranians I talk to, they tell me, look, if it's going to be another 8 years, this time war with the United States, with the prime instigator of this, then so be it. We will fight that. So the Iranians, at least on the strategic levels, they got ready over the last 30 years to fight a long war. And they have a strategy and they have tactics in order to implement that. And this will not allow them to kind of use a wonder weapon and just, win over the Americans overnight, but to draw it out. As I said before, give enough time, the United States will lose interest. In Afghanistan, it took 20 years. In other theaters, it took less. But Iran is looking at such a scenario in which they have to, basically be in a war economy and live for years with warfare being implemented. And what they're trying to do is to expel the United States from the region. So they will keep bombing all of the US military facilities in the Gulf region, in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE. Maybe also start bombing again such facilities in Israel once the time and opportunity is right, or if Israel starts striking Iran. A key pillar of the Iranian strategy is to re-establish reciprocity. The United States and Israel are used to bomb others and be completely fine themselves, right? Nothing happens to us. Israel is implementing a genocide in Gaza, and a part of except for a couple of dead soldiers Israeli dead soldiers, and in Lebanon a couple of dead soldiers, nothing really happens. There is no large-scale bombing campaign that happens in Israel, right? The only one who was able to do something like that was Iran. And Iran is now trying to re-establish this reciprocity. If you bomb one of our cities, we're going to bomb one of yours. If you bomb our desalination plant, we're going to bomb yours. If you try to blow up one of our nuclear power plants, then we know where your nuclear power plant stands, dear Israel. We can blow that up too. We don't need nuclear weapons to cause nuclear havoc in your country. So, and that's the kind of balance that they balance, the kind of insurance policy that they're putting up, trying to re-establish that you cannot bomb us with impunity. You will suffer too, so do not start bombing. That's another reason why they are currently not bombing Israel, because Israel is actually not shooting currently at Iran, and that's something that the Iranians want. Now, what I foresee then is that on the US side is that they will try another couple of things. Again, the only real, I can't call it a strategy, but tactic that I see is to do trial and error as a method, and maybe try a couple of other things. I don't know, maybe somebody's working on a large scale cyber attack on Iran. Maybe that's on the cards. I mean, we know that the Obama administration back in, when was that, 2014 or 2015, they managed to infiltrate Iran with a I think Stuxnet, this virus was called, and destroy some of their centrifuges. So a cyber attack to destroy part of Iran's nuclear program. Maybe people are thinking about stuff like that. Maybe people are thinking about another wave of drone warfare, boots on the ground. I don't know. There's the sky's the limit, right? Or not the sky's the limit. Actually, the physical capabilities of the United States are the limit, but that they might go through waves of attacks in one form or another in order to try to somehow break the Iranian resistance. But the resistance, or the way that Iran structured its defense, is very, very hard to break. One of the biggest surprises to me and many others is to learn how Iran actually structured its own military forces in order to make sure that these decapitation strikes don't work. I mean, that's one more thing. I mean, decapitation strikes, that was one more kind of tactical attempt at breaking Iran, right? With the idea if you decapitate enough leadership, then the country will either give up or it will descend into chaos. Mm-hmm. What the Iranians did for the last 25 years is to structure their political process and their military in a decentralized way. Everybody in the West keeps thinking, oh, the Ayatollah is like, he's like Kim Jong-un, or is like the central figure and controls everything, like the puppet master, right? So if you kill the puppet master, then the puppets fall to the floor, right? And nobody knows what to do. No, Iran structured itself in the exact opposite way, that every leader is replaceable. Every leader has 4 or 5 layers of replacement people waiting. Just like that's exactly the same thing Hezbollah did and Hamas did. And that's why these two institutions still exist. Because for every leader you kill, you've got 2 or 3 who could replace him and then just rise through the ranks. These things are very well organized as organizations, as pyramids. But the Iranians did something even bigger, which is they duplicated the pyramids, especially in the military realm. Turns out Iran is not under one single military command. The military forces of Iran, IRGC and the regular military, are under 31 commands. They have 31 military prefectorates that, by district, in which the top leader gets to decide what to bomb and how to react to anything happening. So even if you eradicated, even if you nuked Tehran, even if the whole 10 million people in Tehran died in a nuclear strike, which would be a crime unfathomable and unimaginable, but the US and Israel have the means to do that. But even if you did that, you would still have 25, 26 of these military prefectorates outside of Tehran surviving, and they have plans of what they do in such a case. So Iran managed through that strategy to maintain something that we before thought was only valid for the nuclear realm, which is the so-called second strike capability, right? If somebody nukes you first, then if you also have nukes, you might die, but if you can still strike back, that you kill them too. And thereby everybody dies, so nobody has an interest to actually shoot the first nuke. That's the whole idea of the MAD doctrine, right? But turns out the Iranians translated that into the conventional realm, saying that, well, even if they try to eradicate us, even if they nuke us, as long as we maintain conventional second strike capabilities, and as long as we maintain the ability to destroy the desalination plants in Israel, through which Israel gets 80% of its drinking water, and we fire everything we've got at their nuclear facility, at Dimona, at their nuclear power plant, we can still basically eradicate Israel from the map. Which would have the very negative side effect, also from the view of the Iranians, that it would also basically eradicate Palestine and good parts of Jordan and Syria. So that's something they don't want to do. Nobody in Iran wants to cause nuclear havoc in Palestine, right? So that's something they don't want to do. But as a weapons of last resort, that is something that's on the cards for them, and that they made it understood that this is a capability they have. So even nuking Iran wouldn't take away the ability to do so, because they decentralized their military structure. Yeah. And that's just something that's quite mind-blowing as a strategy, which means that Iran's strategy is built around the ability to absorb shocks, which means they're willing to die. And they proved that. Their leadership actually didn't hide. They killed a lot of leaders, and these leaders went into the street. They didn't hide. They were willing to die, and die they did. And counterstrikes. They can implement counterstrikes, and that's why they buried all of their missile facilities and so on so deeply underground, so that they, even while being bombarded, can still build more missiles and drones in order to maintain conventional second strike capability, which in their strategy will hopefully lead to a cessation of hostility from the other side. Because if the other side understands that there's just no way of winning, there's just no way of getting anything, then at some point it will stop. Or Iran will succeed in bombing the United States out of its immediate vicinity, because just like if you destroy enough US military goods, there's just nothing there anymore. There's just nothing left, even if the Gulf states still wanted you in their countries. If you don't have enough, especially navy capacity to ship over there, then well, what do you do? So it's a battle of perception and a battle of military capability. So one of the things Iran must do is to outproduce the United States, not in total, but in what it can deploy regionally. And I think they're working on that at the moment. And the US is still in this trial and error phase, hoping that it can throw something that will stick.
Yeah, it's trying to throw a Hail Mary, it seems like. Okay, so just a couple questions before we wrap up. So one question I have is, there's this talk of the munitions of the United States running low. Donald Trump comes out, says no, they're not running low, and I'm thinking about it in terms of, if these are running low, and we've already had issues with China having a huge refinement capacity for rare earths and many other critical minerals and such, and now we're in a position where our munitions are running low. We're wasting our resources. We're spending billions of dollars on this conflict that many American citizens are like, why are we even here? Like, we don't even agree with this. And so it seems like the U.S. as an empire is becoming weakened. And when I think of it in the context of this competition with China's still strengthening. They're still doing business. They're still, I think I was watching your show, and it was said that, China's still looking more favorable amongst many other nations over in those regions and such over in Europe. And so it seems like the U.S. is getting weakened, and China continues to get stronger based on their diplomacy and how they engage with the broader world.
I think that's correct. I mean, I wouldn't say China is a winner of this conflict, but China is not weakening at the moment. There were a lot of fears that part of the idea of this war with Iran might be to choke off China from an important supplier of energy, the Gulf states. I mean, both Iran and the Gulf states, so Kuwait, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, and so on, they all send oil to China, and China needs oil. China has a huge need for energy to fuel its still growing industrial base. One of the worries, especially of people like Brian Berletic and so on, who look at the grand strategic picture, was that a welcome side effect, if not the main reason for the war, would be to cut off China from that part of its suppliers, which could then also be used as a precedent, as a rehearsal for an even bigger choke point cutoff, which would be the Strait of Malacca, through which China gets about 80% of all of its trade, including energy that goes through there. But it seems to me that that's probably an overestimation of the strategic calculus in DC. This was maybe some people thought of that as a welcome side effect, but I don't think it was I don't think it was the motivating factor for the Iran war. Plus, it doesn't really work. I mean, Iran still is able to export some of its oil to China. The Gulf states, China tries to maintain a relationship with the Gulf states and get oil through there. Plus, China just showed that it can reduce its oil imports and still be completely fine. So its own strategic reserves seem to be much larger than what we thought until now. It probably has the largest strategic reserve on Earth by several times. We don't exactly know how big it is, but it seems to be quite humongous that they're able to just cut down imports and be still completely fine and not even talk about it. So it just shows again that China is on the one hand doing well in its economy, and it is prepared for a lot of situations. And of course, on the other hand, both of the wars at the moment, Iran and Ukraine, are weakening the U.S. For a long time, we thought the U.S. military-industrial complex is limitless, and as long as you cough up the money, you will get your Patriots and your HIMARS and your tanks and whatnot order fulfilled. And now we learned, oh, look at that. No, the HIMARS are running out. The Patriots are running out. The US has to redeploy HIMARS and Patriots from East Asia, from Korea and Japan, into the Middle East. And turns out they can only produce, 70, 80, 90 of these things a year of the HIMARS systems. And that's just way not enough. It's way not enough. So the big old weapons, these missiles and these very expensive kaboom things, they are not serving their purpose very much anymore. They are very difficult to produce. The United States actually doesn't have a lot of capacity anymore to do them. Can still produce them, but not in infinite numbers and large quantities. And apparently the US military-industrial complex system hasn't yet changed to producing cheaper, lower-end kind of drones. I mean, it does produce drones, but apparently nothing that is capable of being a game changer and a new wonder weapon that it could use in order to break the resistance of Iran. So asymmetric warfare, I must say though, Iran is not waging an asymmetric war against the US. It's waging a very much symmetric war actually, but it is doing so at a much lower cost point than the US, and that gives it a structural advantage, and it now depletes the US even further. Of course, this is good for a couple of the MIC companies in the US. I mean, Raytheon and Boeing and so on. They've got their order books full, and they swim in cash at the moment that they're being showered with. But they lack the industrial base to fulfill everything quickly enough, and that's a real world constraint. And again, that's something the neocons usually don't take into consideration, that maybe you just don't have enough stuff quickly enough, cheap enough, in order to then supply your military forces to go and win the wars the way that you think you do. And on the other hand, in China, we don't yet know. We know the Chinese are prepared. We know the Chinese have now one of the largest navies in the world. We know that they have a large military, and we know that they have nuclear weapons. We know that they have a lot of different conventional weapons. We know that they're good at producing drones, but those things have never been tested or used in a real war scenario. So the kind of proof that we have now for the capabilities of the US in Iran, US in Ukraine, or NATO against Russia, Russia against NATO, there we now have a lot of data points that we can look at and say, like, well, now we understand what they are able to do and what they're not able to do. The Russians are able to carpet bomb Kiev. They're not able to intercept all the drones that Ukraine throws at Moscow. The Ukrainians are able to blow up a couple of warehouses in the Moscow vicinity. They are not able to shoot down what's coming in from Russia. I mean, that's just real world proof of what you can and cannot do. We don't have that kind of assessment for China. So if I was a military planner in the United States, this would worry me day and night. And this should be an incentive to be very careful and to try not to escalate with China. Unfortunately, we know that there's political leadership in the US, one of who recently died, Mr. Graham, that couldn't care less about this kind of real world consideration, because in their fantasy world, all you need to do is to throw enough US bombs at it, and then they will surrender. But yeah. Graham died well before we came even close to any such scenario in either with either Russia or Iran. So I do hope that common sense is going to start to prevail.
Okay, Pascal, so I know we have to get going. I just have one last question, just quick response, just quick thoughts on. So the political elite class in the United States. I know that when we were in Afghanistan, we were there for 20 years. We were in Iraq and such, and that went through total different administrations. I mean, from neocons and George Bush to Barack Obama, we were still there. I mean, we were still in Afghanistan all the way until Joe Biden, right? And so it seems like whenever these conflicts start, it can go from administration to administration and such.
Yeah.
Do you see that being a potential for this conflict?
Yes. If Iran is not successful in fending the United States off, or maybe like physically displacing them, then it could be a new forever war that the next administration will inherit, and that will then continue. In general, looking at what happened in Ukraine, it seems that we are entering a period in which extended, prolonged warfare, multi-year warfare, that will then boil on a lower level, but that keeps continuing, is rather something that's to be expected. So it might very well be that, the big bombing campaigns of over Tehran are over, but that low-level conflict with sporadic shooting at each other, sporadic sabotage missions, sporadic kind of missile and drone attacks on all sides, that might continue for years to come, and that we will see rather an accommodation of that status quo rather than the attempt at solving it, which is basically what we saw with Ukraine and Russia, right? And NATO, Ukraine, Russia, where the conflict, this interstate war, has been now going on for 4.5 years. And Ukraine, Russia, and NATO, although they suffer, they are able to maintain the system, their systems, and therefore keep it going. It might be that both the US, Israel, and Iran will settle into a similar kind of violent status quo where warfare keeps continuing, if both sides find ways to sustain, to absorb the damage. The question on my end is the United States going to be able to absorb damage over a prolonged period of time? The Iranians already signaled that they're able to do it and they're willing to do it. Question is, what's the US side and the US allies, the Gulf states? Mm-hmm. How far is their willingness going to go? But I think it is an option that this might last for years. It might resolve, maybe by the US walking away, maybe by Iran just bombing them away. But it might, if this resolve to sit it out sets in on both sides, we might see a multi-year forever war just boiling, simmering on lower flame.
Yeah, I don't think Trump's ego is going to be willing to just give it up. So appreciate you, Pascal.
One more thing. We don't know the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this economic herd, and once the petroleum reserves are actually used up, we don't know what happens then. Actually, this is kind of new territory. But, it could either break the U.S. will and spirit, or the U.S. might find alternative ways to deal with this. I mean, squeeze it out of Venezuela, I have no idea. They might find a way around this strategic petroleum reserve problem and the diesel problem, which something we can't predict yet. But if they do, then again, the simmering might go on.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Well, look forward to talking with you again and having you back on the show to discuss as this continues to unfold. Where can the audience go and check out some of your writing, some of your interviews, and all of that?
Oh, well, the best place is go to my YouTube channel. It's called Neutrality Studies. My homepage, neutralitystudies.com, or my Substack. Google Neutrality Studies. You'll find something. All
right. Sounds good. Appreciate you, Pascal, for your time. And you all hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed yet. Click the link in the description below to the Commodity University so that you can understand how commodities work, and even in the context of geopolitics, how this has implications for commodities. And so thank you all for watching. And Pascal, until next time.